Welcome to the Caffeine stream on Caffeine and Philosophy.
Alright, hello everyone, welcome to the Caffeine stream. My name is CB Robertson. This is episode 42, and today I wanted to talk about work. To that end, I'll try to keep it fairly short. I was inspired to do this not just because of the Instagram poll. This was a very popular subject, but because of the enormous popularity of a certain individual who's become loved and hated in a very polarizing way, perhaps intentionally. And I'm speaking of the one and only Andrew Tate. Yes, a man known for many things, but I think to really understand Tate on his own terms is to dive into this subject of work. What is, and the question we're exploring here is, what is the relationship between man and work, between us? What is our relationship with work? Or rather, what should our relationship with work be? One of the things that Andrew Tate goes on about is the matrix. This is something a lot of, thinkers, philosophers, marketers try to push. Stefan Molyneux years ago put out this video, The Story of Your Enslavement, which is, of course, the Matrix itself, the film, sort of argued. Escaping the Matrix means getting out of the machine that is, milking you of your life juice, your energy, for its own purposes. Now, I'll get into Andrew Tate in more depth in a few minutes here, but there's someone else I think that we owe chronological priority to on this subject, and that is not Andrew Tate, but someone we might call the antithesis of Andrew Tate in some ways, and his twin in others. I'm speaking of Tim Ferriss. This whole subject of our relationship with work goes... I think it really kicked off in our generation in 2007 when Tim Ferriss released The 4-Hour Workweek, which was a massive success, tremendously popular book. I mean, just the title alone is very promising. A 4-hour work week? 1/10 of what is, purported to be a normal work week for Americans. And it was tremendously successful, not only because Americans love shortcuts. We love the get-rich-quick scheme, perhaps more than other cultures. But it promised... it didn't promise to make you rich. That was maybe the interesting thing about Tim Ferriss. Tim Ferriss was offering freedom, and he was really, if not the founder of minimalism, one of the popularizers of the in a sort of early form of this idea of minimalism. And he was also advocating against working within the system as well. He channeled a kind of general discontent with the system in, I want to say, Becoming a Barbarian, but perhaps one of his other books. Jack Donovan wrote about the film Gran Torino and how, generations ago, this old, crotchety old man would, with great self-righteousness, declare himself to be a tax-paying American. He actually went to confession because he had, lied about the value of a car, which he said is the same as stealing, not paying your taxes. That philosophy expresses a kind of faith in the system that I don't think that Americans, I think, used to have at one point, but no longer do. And now everyone is trying to they sense that the people at the very highest levels of government are, of course, working the system to their own advantage and are not, public servants in any meaningful sense. So why shouldn't they? And so these philosophies that purport to teach you how to get outside of the system, to get out of the pipeline that sort of just funnels you into some meaningless 9-to-5 job, seems to be very attractive in a kind of postmodern political landscape. And so the philosophy of the 4-hour work week is that work is, if not bad, it does kind of argue that work is bad, but it argues that the work, at least in the modern sense of work, is an impediment to really living. Work is not the same as living. Living is experiences. Living is traveling. Working is going to tango competitions in Buenos Aires or learning Muay Thai in Thailand. It's pushing yourself to your limits and acquiring these experiences in this short time you have on Earth. And of course he says, this doesn't mean you have to travel. It means he offers that vision to sort of capture your mind. But he says, but if those ideas aren't, compelling to you, whatever is compelling to you as far as what constitutes life requires, the freedom to do these things, whatever these things happen to be. And the time mandates and the energy requirements of working are an impediment to that. And I'll quote from the introduction to his book. Tim Ferriss writes, "This book is for anyone who is sick of the deferred life plan and wants to live life large instead of postpone it. Case studies range from a Lamborghini driving 21-year-old to a single mother who traveled the world for 5 months with her 2 children. If you're sick of the standard menu of options and prepared to enter a world of infinite options, this book is for you. The objective is to create freedom of time and place and use, both however you want." End quote. So that's the philosophy of Tim Ferriss as it pertains to work. And I think we could say it's a philosophy of disillusionment with any kind of value or virtue in work for its own sake. It's kind of hedonistic would be too crass of a way of putting it, but it's putting the value on, experiences for their own sake, as the sort of raison d'être of life. There is a philosophy of what life is embedded inherently in the view, and it's a valid philosophy. It's just something interesting to think about. So, against Tim Ferriss's minimalism and his, escape the matrix in order to travel, in order to experience things, in order to, experience freedom, to, do whatever it is that freedom allows you to do besides work, we have on the other side Andrew Tate. Now, Andrew Tate is, I believe, 35 years old. He's quite young. He sort of emerged out of nowhere in the last couple years. And of course, it wasn't really out of nowhere. These, 10-year overnight success stories are never quite as, sudden as they appear to the observer, who suddenly discovers someone and then feels like they're suddenly everywhere because they're now exposed to years worth of content that they just hadn't seen before. But Andrew Tate has a little different approach to work. And I a little while ago I actually listened to the first half of Andrew Tate's Hustlers University series. I only listened to about maybe 4.5 hours out of the full 8 hours. It was kind of a lot, and I think those first 4 hours were enough to get a feeling of what is entailed in the whole course. But I'll play you a little clip here of Andrew Tate in his own words, describing his philosophy of life and work and what he's all about. Okay. All I ever wanted to do was get rich. Now, there are some similar... let me describe what I think is attractive about this view. Andrew Tate, like Tim Ferriss, advocates escaping the matrix. But for Tim Ferriss, the matrix had control of your time. With Tate, now Tate is also very time oriented. His first lesson in Hustlers University, and the most repeated one, the most important one, the one he says, if you take away nothing else, take this away, is speed. Time is money, literally. And if you don't get things done quickly, if you don't act, if you have an idea for a business and you aren't getting it going, and if you don't have that business up and running tomorrow, what are you doing? You're wasting your time. You're wasting his time. You're wasting everyone's time if you're not acting upon your ideas with alacrity. And there's something kind of compelling about that. It taps into a kind of masculine, competitive, thumotic instinct I think we have. That famous Alec Baldwin scene from Glengarry Ross comes to mind, where Alec Baldwin says, "Coffee's for closers." Slightly sociopathic, but also very motivating if you're a certain kind of person. It gets you fired up to go out and sell to some suckers. I sort of stopped in the middle of the focus here. Because while Tate is attentive to time, for Tate, the matrix is about power and status. And so the promise with escaping the matrix is not getting more time and getting these experiences, but rather is centered around acquiring status and power, and luxury, if it's a profitable way to demonstrate one's status and power. It's almost like, not only do we not want to be slaves, we would like to be masters, because that's how the world works. And I might be putting words in his mouth that might be unfair at an abstract level, but given the way he talks about running his companies, I don't think it's far from the mark either. And so the philosophy is that status and power are what matters in life. Money is sort of a metric for that and a tool for acquiring it, which is why he says, everything that doesn't get you money is bullshit. Reading books is bullshit. All this other romantic stuff is bullshit. It's about power and status. And this creates a very different relationship to work. As the name Hustlers University implies, Andrew Tate is very pro-work, and he's pro-hard work. He says if you want to acquire the good things in life, power and status, you have to work hard, you have to work fast, and hard and fast isn't even sufficient. It's necessary, but it's not enough. You have to also have a kind of cunning, and you have to have the right mindset, which is also valuable, I think, to a certain degree. Where it gets interesting is the insinuation that if you're doing less than that, there's something disgraceful in that. If you want to, if you feel like maybe that amount of money or power is a little overrated, isn't worth it. That's kind of pathetic in a way. It's bullshit, as you would say. And living is, driving a Lamborghini and banging hot women. That's living because everyone wants that, whether they admit it or not. And so work is the necessary mechanism to get there. And so you work your ass off. You work harder than other people work. You work smarter and harder in order to gain the power and status. And if you don't have that drive, you're like deficient in life force or something to that effect. And I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I don't think I'm mischaracterizing his essential philosophy. And so, but we have on the one hand Tim Ferriss, who says, like, why bother with this at all? It's do the absolute bare minimum to get by, which is a lot less than you think it is. And if you're smart, you can actually go and do lots of cool things, and sort of escape the world. Let other people handle the infrastructure. Whereas Andrew Tate, on the other hand, is the absolutely work your ass off to the bones every day, never stop grinding, as Alec Baldwin says, always be closing. And between these two, I was reminded, it was about 15 minutes into listening to Hustlers University, I was reminded of a section from one of my favorite books of the Bible. I should remind anyone listening to this that I am not a Christian. I have my strong criticisms of Christianity, but that does not prevent me from enjoying certain parts of the good book, Ecclesiastes and Job in particular. And it's a passage from Ecclesiastes that came to mind and remains with me at other times in my life too. And I'll read it for you here. The king says, "Then I said to myself, the fate of the fool will overtake me also. What then do I gain by being wise? I said to myself, this too is meaningless. For the wise, like the fool, will not be long remembered. The days have already come when both have been forgotten. Like the fool, the wise too must die. So I hated life, because the work that is done under the sun was grievous to me. All of it is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. I hated all the things I had toiled for under the sun, because I must leave them to the one who comes after me. And who knows whether that person will be wise or foolish? Yet they will have control over all the fruit of my toil, into which I have poured my effort and skill under the sun. This too is meaningless. So my heart began to despair over all my toilsome labor under the sun. For a person may labor with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, and then they must leave all they own to another who has not toiled for it. This too is meaningless, and a great misfortune. What do people get for all the toil and anxious striving with which they labor under the sun? All their days their work is grief and pain. Even at night their minds do not rest. This too is meaningless. A person can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in their own toil. This too, I see, is from the hand of God." Ecclesiastes 2:16 through 24. And the words of the king are particularly interesting because earlier in the book, the author describes, the palaces he has built. He's had many women. He's enjoyed all the pleasures life has to offer. He's driven the proverbial Lamborghini and been with all the hot young women. And he doesn't find that actually any more satisfying. There's that he does not find that as satisfying as Andrew Tate is selling it to be. And one can imagine, with traveling and acquiring many experiences in the way that Tim Ferriss describes, one might acquire great wisdom. But, as the king tells us, also in book 2, if I remember correctly, that, wisdom, well, he said it in this section too, that wisdom is also meaningless and vanity and chasing after the wind, because the wise and the foolish suffered the same fate. But not only for that, but also because with great wisdom comes great sorrow. And with that understanding comes a sort of empathetic suffering with the world that you understand in its injustice and in its corruption and so forth. So, we would predict that someone who has perhaps acquired the worldly wisdom of Tim Ferriss might be not happy. And I won't go into details because I like Tim Ferriss in many ways. I think he's an interesting person to follow and to learn from. As with Andrew Tate, I will say. But I don't envy Tim Ferriss. And I don't think Tim Ferriss would have anyone envy him either. He has dealt with serious depression, suicidal ideation, I think self-harm attempts on his own life and things like that. He is not... I don't think he is a happy person. I don't think he would say he is a happy person. And I don't think that life is associated with great meaning or happiness either, however great it sounds on paper. And conversely, I don't think Andrew Tate will take you to that kind of satisfaction either. It will be interesting to see, because he's not as old as Tim Ferriss is. He's still young-ish, 34. A recent convert to a monotheistic religion in the form of Islam. We'll see if that changes his personality at all, his ideas of what is good in the world. But as we can see in Ecclesiastes, and arguably with stories like the Iliad and Gilgamesh as well, we've seen men wrestling with these questions, not just in the last, decade or two, but literally for all of recorded history. Literally our first story ever written down, Gilgamesh. He is a king over an entire city, one of the mightiest men in the world, and he is, unhappy, dissatisfied, a tyrant, and only when he discovers friendship, is that somewhat ameliorated, and then they go on adventures, but then his friend dies, and suddenly that brings its own vexations. He has experience, which brings suffering. It seems like he went from the Andrew Tate lifestyle to the Tim Ferriss lifestyle, and then finally, after his pursuit of immortality, which too is vanity, and chasing after what he cannot have, that slips through his fingers like wind in the very end. He is told by a woman, it's not your fate to have these things. Just enjoy the good things in life. She says the same thing that the king in Ecclesiastes says. A person can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in their own toil. This too I see is from the hand of God. And that line, finding satisfaction in their own toil, I think brings us to our third character. Someone in the Aristotelian healthy mean between Andrew Tate on one hand and Tim Ferriss on the other. Curiously in the Matrix, as the two extremes would say. But and yet somehow still happy. How can that be? Well, this person is Mike Rowe. Mike Rowe, you might know him from Dirty Jobs, the show. He's recently done a podcast, That's The Way I Heard It, where he tells stories of interesting people doing extraordinary things. But Mike Rowe's philosophy of work is a little different. It begins with embracing work as a lifestyle. And Mike Rowe is not he's more philosophical than he portrays himself. If you listen to his TED Talk on Dirty Jobs, he literally walks the audience through some of the Greek terminology of tragedy, anagnorisis and peripeteia, the recognition of his true position and his discovery of what real work is actually like, and who possesses knowledge about what work entails. And he has a pair of very amusing stories, actually. One about lamb castration and bad advice from PETA or some other animal rights organization versus what the farmers know about their own animals. And another funny instance on an Alaskan fishing boat, and what was illustrated to him about the priorities of these people, because it's not that blue collar workers don't value money, like Andrew Tate, or don't value freedom. A lot of them, and I will include myself in this category, chose the trades precisely because they feel that there is more freedom there than there is in a white-collar job where you have a golden muzzle, or in academia where you have an even worse kind of muzzle that it's not even golden. You can't say what you want, you can't explore the topics that you want, and you're not even paid for it. You just get a kind of lame academic prestige. Some academics do quite well for themselves, I should say, but he said that the breakdown, he has a funny tidbit about safety third, as opposed to the much touted safety first signs you'll see at many job sites, where he says the order of values really is, but also ought to be, money first, but not exclusively. Right behind money is a satisfaction of a job well done, and part of the value in receiving money is the validation that in fact you did do your job well, and their pride in one's income is in some sense tied viscerally and materially to the quality of the work that you did. An author who talks about this at greater length is Matthew Crawford in his wonderful book, Shop Class's Soulcraft, which I've already talked about a number of times, so I won't reiterate it in depth here, other than that it's well worth reading. But after money and satisfaction in a job well done, then finally third comes safety. Important, just not the most important thing. And so money is not, contra Tate, the exclusive value. It's not about power and status to the exclusion of all else, and if you care about anything else, you're a sucker. Money and power do matter because we all need a certain amount in order to get by in this world. But the value is more in sustenance rather than in climbing the ladder. I need to eat, I need to put a roof over my head, I need to provide for my family, maybe have a few nice toys. And as I said before, the proof of quality. But the work itself has value. Aside from what it gets for you, the work might be, in some sense, worth doing for its own sake. Now, you still want to be paid because of the previously mentioned reasons, but some of the value in work is in the development of skill and of certain character qualities and virtues, and in the satisfaction of keeping yourself busy and of accomplishing things. So if you are skipping work entirely in the way that Tim Ferriss might be, or viewing it through purely utilitarian means, and only valuing what you can get from it, you might be missing out on some of the most valuable parts of work. In these, character building and skill building forms. Now, that's not to say that you should let yourself be taken advantage of. Part of learning these things and part of learning the value of work is learning the value of your own time. And, people who talk about learning the value of hard work often neglect to mention this detail. It's become kind of a conservative talking point that's often employed by libertarians in a way that sounds like they're defending underpaying people. But if a worker learns the value of hard work and truly learns the value of their own time, they're a lot less likely to be underpaid, because if they know what the value of their time is and their boss is underpaying them, they can go somewhere else. And if they can't go somewhere else, it means kind of axiomatically that their time is maybe not as valuable in the market as they thought it was. But that's the value in learning the value of your time and hard work. But I think to finish the parallels in our comparison here and close things up, the philosophy of Mike Rowe is that, contra Andrew Tate and Tim Ferriss, work actually is living. Whereas with Tate, work was a means to an end, and with Ferriss, work was an impediment to an end. With Mike Rowe, work actually is the end. Work is an end in itself. Life is comprised of work. The conservation of energy says that calories require calories. In order to live, we must work. We must acquire more energy in order to sustain ourselves. So work has to be done. And why not participate in it? But secondly, and more importantly, physics aside, much of the satisfaction in life is actually found in work. More so than in recreation or, peacocking status. We can see this too in blue zones where people are regularly living into their 80s and 90s or their hundreds even. They're not retiring. They're working into their 90s. They have a role and other people dependent upon them. And is it tedious? Yes. Is it sometimes unpleasant? Absolutely. But the satisfaction and the feeling of belonging that comes with doing work that helps other people seems to outweigh that, at least if longevity and self-reported satisfaction in life is any measure to go on. And I guess I'll close with my own personal experience on this, because there have been times where I have been unemployed. And I guess technically living on the street in a way. There was a particular summer where I had a rather amicable, actually, disagreement with my family, and I ended up living out of my 1986 Toyota 4Runner, sleeping in parking lots, doing laundry in a laundromat. In a way, it was one of the most enjoyable summers of my life. I rather enjoyed it. I did a little bit of pizza delivery in the evening some nights. Went swimming before I showered at a local gym. It was not a bad life in some ways. But after a while, the absence of status, the absence of options, does begin to make one feel a little bit like Peter Pan, like it's time to grow up and do something. Andrew Tate would have been especially motivating to me, I think, at that point. Conversely, there have been times in my life, especially in the last year and a half, where I was working 68-hour weeks, and making very good money. Very good money. And it was nice to, catch up on debts a little bit, because I had been underemployed at my previous employer and jumped straight into 68-hour weeks on a prevailing wage job. So very good money. Did not want to continue that. after about 4 or 5 months of that. That was enough of that. There's too much work. And so I think both of these extremes in working, that gazelle intensity, as some people talk about, can feel a little bit like, what am I doing this all for? If on the other end of this gazelle intensity, I'm just, I've made this into a habit, and I'm working hard so that I can go work hard again. And then if I'm not working hard, I literally have no hobbies because I had no time to have hobbies or interests or relationships. And now I have to start from scratch because I haven't maintained any of those things. And so all I can do is, I don't know, sit on a couch mindlessly, watch a game, drink a beer. I have no energy to think interesting thoughts. I have no time to spend time with my family. That's a little, that seems like a kind of a vapid, shallow life, no matter how much money comes out of that. And conversely, the vagabond Tim Ferriss minimalist lifestyle might actually be quite pleasant for a time, until things maybe really start to go south, either in your life or in the life of your country, or someone gets sick, and suddenly you have no resources or ability to care for them. Now, Tim Ferriss does talk about ways to make tremendous amounts of money. I think the passive income thing is a little overblown from my understanding of people who make lots of passive income. They're spending, more than 45, 50 hours a week doing all kinds of tweaking and optimizing to keep their passive income flowing. It's a really active job. So when we consider what is entailed in these two extremes in their view of work, it sort of begs the question, what is the value in escaping the matrix, so to speak? If the people who seem to be the happiest and most satisfied in their lives are actually living in the proverbial matrix. Maybe the matrix is a bad metaphor here. Maybe the enchantment of alternative possibilities is a matrix of its own kind that has, captured the minds of young men. And that when we get down to the actual direct experience, the sunlight on the other side of Plato's cave, maybe these extremes, these ideas of alternative relationships to work, are the matrix, are the vanity, the chasing after the wind that does not bring satisfaction that it promises, but that perhaps the best we can do is to enjoy the small good things in life and find the satisfaction in our work in the way that the king of Ecclesiastes and that Mike Rowe advocates. I will say that's how I've tried to live my own life for the past, say, 7 or 8 years or so, and I have to say, so far so good. It's been quite an enjoyable existence, as my wife says. I'm living my best life, and compared to many of the other people I have met and listened to and talked to, it's true. That's not to say that embracing work alone is sufficient for happiness. It's just to say that escaping the matrix of work, I don't think gets you any closer to happiness. So, I think I'll close it on that. Thanks so much for listening. Hope that was enjoyable, and take care.